Hello, my Food Moon friends. Welcome back. I have another interview with my one of my really dear clients, Devin, today. And I wanted to entice you with a couple beautiful points that he makes where he's a founder, he's in the startup world, he's in his main focus was productivity and focus and the transformations that he made through using sleep and stress and food to really get to an optimal place where he feels more happier than he's ever felt and also more productive. And also, as the kind of side benefit, was that his gout also cleared up. And the other piece that I really took away from this interview was we chatted about how he has referred clients to me and they haven't actually worked out. And so I really dug into, well, who is this coaching program really for? Because it really worked really well for him. And he made such a great point of saying that if you're kind of, and this is my words, if you're satisfied with the status quo of your life, and his words were, if you're okay with external goals being set for you, then this program's not for you. But if you want to set your own goals and go after your chosen desires, then this program really helps you hone into reverse engineering and creating that set of goals and that set of, I'm putting some words in his mouth now, but into what you're really wanting, something that's beyond what's externally set for you, something that's tapped in and tuned into your internal desires. So go ahead and listen to this awesome interview. Devin is a wealth of inspiration and articulation, and enjoy.
Welcome! Here is your hostess and coach, Chandra, helping people make food and mood changes doable without missing out. Go ahead, high five that like button, subscribe and share while you're there.
All right. Hello, welcome everybody. Chandra Zas. I am here with one of my former clients, Devin. Devin, thank you so much for being open to sharing your journey of us working together and the before and after, and even the middle of what it was like to go through my food and mood coaching program. I'm deeply grateful for you being here and sharing your authentic truth and experience. So
Thanks for
massive
having
thank
me.
yeah, and we've just been chatting for the last 45 minutes because we have a blast chatting together and running ideas, and you always have great questions. And yeah, I've missed you. How long has it been since it's been like over a year, I think, a year and a half
It's
since
been
we
over
stopped
a
coaching.
year. Yeah, it's been a year and a
Yeah.
half.
Yeah, it's been a while. Um, so in that said, it's definitely like a little bit of a rewind to when we started coaching together. But I'd love for you to share, well, actually, and maybe we can start out if you want to share who you are and anything about what you're doing in the world. If you want to kind of like a short introduction to who you are, we can start there.
Uh, I'm Devin, and what am I doing in the world? Well, business wise, I've started a few businesses now. One was in commercial truck insurance. I'm currently working on one to help people with personal injury claims have a much better solution. And then I help a few startups on the side. They're typically in some of the more boring areas of the economy, like transportation, logistics, and insurance. I joke that they're boring. I think they're actually quite interesting, but I think there's just a lot of opportunity to continue to make these important things that help society function run better. And then on the side, I like to hike and do the various outdoor. I'm very into like do outdoor hobbies. I like to be around nature and things like that.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you. Would you share how you can also share how you found me, and also kind of where you were at and what you were looking for and why you decided to sign up for coaching with me.
Yeah, I found you through a mutual friend who has done a lot of interesting work in food. And I was working a lot at my first startup. There was a lot of pressure. A lot of the pressure was self-manufactured, where I felt the need to grow a business at a certain rate and serve a certain volume of customers. And there was a lot of aspects around validation and self-worth tied to that. And some of my habits were suffering at the time. I would sometimes compulsively overeat. Like I would, get some, whether it was not necessarily like potato chips, but it could be I'm stressed, I'm gonna snack, or I'm gonna run out and get some tacos, or I would just eat too much. I wasn't like necessarily eating a ton in one sitting. I was just constantly eating, and I was feeling like just a little bit of back pain from sitting a lot, and just a lot of anxiety. Like I would wake up in the morning before work a lot of the time and just feel like this flood of, second I wake up, I'm in bed, I got to open my phone and check my email and check my Slack and check my texts, and I don't want to let anyone down, and I have a lot of stuff to do, and a lot of deadlines to hit, and I just felt a lot of pressure, and I didn't necessarily feel that happy. I felt chronically a lot of need to just get a lot done, and wasn't giving myself space to relax and feel certain aspects of comfort, which I was overcompensating with food, or I also wasn't sleeping enough, and I was missing a lot of workouts, and I was basically, yeah, like probably 15 pounds heavier, out of shape, and chronically drinking too much coffee. I try to make up for it, and yeah.
Yeah. Would you yeah, that's a pretty darn close picture to what I remember when we started together. I remember the mutual friend was actually she was a client of mine, and I think she was your friend, and I think I remember you saying, tell me if this is true. I remember you saying like, yeah, I was talking to my friend and she told me that like I really need to work on my health. And so like I remember it being something like that. And so you like arrived to like our first call and you're like, yeah, I think I'm needing to work on my health. Can you help me? Something like that. Do you remember something like that?
Something like that. Yeah, I remember, especially in my teens, I would always be out playing tennis and very into fitness and whatnot. And then I just started to work all the time and started experiencing like lower back pain and whatnot. And I was like, well, crap. I'm like late 20s and having these issues. This is not good, especially if I want to be able to do this stuff when I'm like 60 years old and whatnot. So I had a little bit of an identity crisis and realized, well, I really got to take care of my health if I'm going to have a long, healthy, and happy life.
Yeah. There's a couple other pieces, and I got your permission before this video to ask probing questions. There's a couple other pieces that I have permission to ask you. I remember, I think it was a couple months in, I learned because it wasn't your like main goal. I think your main goal, if I remember correctly, was you wanted to have better brain performance. You wanted to be able to focus and be more productive while you were working. Do you remember that being pretty accurate with your goal? And then I
Mhm.
remember a couple months in kind of discovering, oh yeah, and I'm like on gout medication. I have like these, and all of these kind of other sub symptoms you shared with me. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, and what I if you're open to sharing, the other piece that with, I mean, I feel a little bit tend to bringing it up, but I also know that it's like such a common issue and that a lot of people don't really comfortable to share, and you said that you're willing to be so open and vulnerable. So with the gout and then with the piece of like wanting to have better productivity and performance, one of the big things that we uncovered, I would say a couple months in, was kind of like what you were using to get yourself going in the morning, and then what you were using to kind of wind down and like turn your brain off in the evening, and then where we eventually got to at the end of our coaching program. Would you share kind of those pieces?
Sure. Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, being in the U.S., there can be a lot of pressure to chase certain levels of status in whatever you're doing. And I've a time in my life where I felt a lot of pressure to like be good at art was like something that I valued a lot in college. I always wanted to be like a great writer, and I didn't see an economic path forward, so I ended up as an accounting and finance student, and I saw entrepreneurship as an outlet to be artistic and to figure out pathways of value and then integrate them into society. And I really like this subjectivity there. And I think like in that I moved to New York, and I felt this could be any city. I'm not saying New York or Ohio or Philadelphia or California, but thinking of thinking of being in New York, you're just around such an incredible group of people and aspects of quality. And I would overdo it. I'd be eating out all the time. I'd be ordering stuff indulgently. I used to always go to places like Italy or the local butcher shop, and man, I probably still have 50 cookbooks over on the shelves behind me. Where every Saturday I would just I'd be really into it. I'd be like, let's go make like this kidney pie from like somewhere in England, and I'm gonna go get some stouts and invite some friends over, and so on and so forth. And so anyway, and I started working in on businesses and feeling all the pressure there, and I I just like it, I just would not sleep enough. That was a big part of it. I felt a sense of guilt turning off, and but I would also I'd go through phases where I'd just work nonstop, and I think I wanted a lot of validation from people that had helped me, people that I had appreciated. So I'm not sleeping, and then I'm drinking a lot of coffee and eating a lot of like savory things. Like I used to eat like breakfast sandwiches pretty much every day from the deli downstairs with sausage and bacon and whatever and processed carbohydrates. And sure enough, like it wasn't just like gout, it was just my biometrics in general. Like I wasn't like my heart rate variability. I have a whoop now and I track all this stuff and I've had absolutely no issues with gout since working with Chandra. But I and so I basically had habits where at the end of the day I was also very into wine. I really loved red wine, and I had I consistently drink 3 to 4 glasses of wine, or I also liked beers a lot. And it wasn't like getting trashed, but I would drink some alcohol and maybe read some articles and read a book, and then maybe have another glass or two. And but like the point is, I'm not waking up fresh, going for getting a nice workout in. I'm not emotionally decompressing. I'm relying on alcohol to slightly numb it, and then I'm reading stuff to distract my brain. And then I'm eating savory foods, and all of a sudden, and my biometrics and my biomarkers aren't optimal. And I was telling myself before that, well, I'm a D1 athlete. I have great genetics. I don't have to worry about anything. I mean, like in my 20s, I can do whatever I want. And like the truth was I couldn't. And that was a pretty large shocker. And I think that like it can be hard to be in the modern US, where you just have such high levels of access to entertainment and enjoyment. And you go to a grocery store, and I think the average grocery store, there's a book by Benjamin Lair, and it was like The Secret Life of Grocery Store. I think he said that there's like 70,000 different SKUs or individual types of food products in the average modern grocery store. And I mean, like, oh my God, like imagine telling that to someone 100 years ago, like before, like say the great AMP, like go back to like Lower East Side, New York in 1910. You'd see, if my guess is you'd see under 1,000. So without
Yeah,
going
the
into so yeah,
overwhelming,
it's
confusing,
just
and
it can get it's easy to overindulge in the modern world. I think it takes a little bit of discipline to self-regulate.
Hello, my friend. How are you? I'm in the Dead Sea, floating in the water. Go ahead and like and share and follow so we can keep in touch.
hell
Maybe
yeah.
some people I think naturally have that, but I think a lot of people do struggle with that, and I definitely did for a period of my life.
Yeah, I think that the struggle is extremely normal. That's why I have like such this mission in my business to help people like
Yeah, for sure.
de-normalize this like crazy normalized struggle. Um, that was awesome. Thank you, Devin. Would you share also? So that's kind of like a really good before picture, and then would you share kind of like where you came to at the end of our working together, like your cravings, your relationship to food, your relationship to your brain and your productivity and your focus and turning your brain on and off? Would you share a little bit about where you got to and where you've maintained?
Sure. I think in talk, thinking about self-regulation and working with you, Chandra, I like, especially as someone who likes to build startups, it's all about ordering chaos. And as John Doerr says from Google, you can't manage what you can't measure. And that's where I've every month for the past 36 months, I'll do a journal entry every few days, not necessarily every day, but sometimes I'll look back and just look at how cleanly my thoughts are connecting based on my current circumstance. The circumstance could be, what am I working on? Who am I hanging out with? What are my hobbies? What types of food am I consuming? When am I consuming the food? I'll even put screenshots of like my Whoop in just to look at like, here's how I feel right now. What are my biomarkers? And just think loosely about like context of my current life experience. And in like there's a there's a philosopher, Baruch Spinoza, that I find very meaningful, where he says if you see someone who suffers from greed or uh, could be a different type of emotion, that there's a reason for that. And like in the example of greed, it's the imbalance. And he points to the problems of community feeling to people with imbalance, where they might not feel enough connection or centeredness. And I think that's where I think that humans uniquely are specialized and need to feel superior in a common cause with another group of people that are also doing high output of work, or high quality of work where it's meaningful, meaning people feel that their needs are met, their shelters met, their food's met, their just these different aspects. There's a sense of belonging. And I think that it can be hard in the modern world where supply and demand is often fragmented. You don't always know who grew the strawberries at your grocery store. You don't always know who made the software product that can get a car to drive you to the airport. You just don't always know the people. So it can fragment community feeling, create isolation and loneliness. And I start with that because I think a lot of people underestimate the level of uh the level of interpersonal relationship issue that's correlated to happiness, and how much people require a functional network of relationships in order to be happy. And I got a lot out of Chandra through the lens of food by breaking down, here's a dinner plate or a lunch plate or a breakfast plate, basically a plate of food, or some place that's holding food, could be a backpack or whatever. What's my relationship to what I eat, from like what goes in my mouth to what comes out of me? And how can I think about that with more deliberation? And I think that sometimes there can be the urge to just go out and have a cheeseburger or have some French fries, instead of thinking about, well, how did I evolve? What were the conditions that created me? And respecting that, which is ordering chaos. Like, it creates chaos if you injure yourself internally. You can develop health issues. You can have a shorter lifespan. You can have 30 years of painful lifespan. And I've seen that happen in people I've cared about, and it's very sad when it happens. And I think that's where, like working with Chandra, a lot of it is simply input output, where you're trying to figure out, are you coping with circumstance, where you may have a cycle where different things and different thought patterns are creating based on that circumstance, but there's a level of like personal ownership there, where you're trying to figure out, how do you uh, how are you being honest and showing ownership and responsibility over your reaction? So if you're having an emotional struggle, and something like anger is an interesting emotion, where anger is the byproduct of control and feeling lack of control in an interpersonal relationship. Using anger is a conscious way of trying to get someone's will, uh, someone to basically meet the need that you're asking for, whether you consciously or unconsciously understand that. That is what anger does. And that's where things like anger are correlated to control, which is correlated to something as simple as taking care of yourself and eating well. And I think that's where spending some time on awareness, I'm not saying that maybe, if you're listening to this, you could be someone who already has this down and innately was really good at this from day one. I'm arguing, I don't think a lot of people naturally are very aware of their input output relationships in how they generate their own happiness. And that's where I think it can be helpful to work with someone like Chandra, who does this day in, day out, and can be a sounding board in the reflection of gaining better self-awareness in the quest to become a happier person.
I love that you said that. It makes me think of one of my clients' questions she asked me last week after our coaching call. She's like, is this really like basic stuff? Like, and from this place of like feeling kind of shameful of like, am I in kindergarten? And I'm like, yes, this is basic stuff. And most people don't know it. And so I love like just using that awareness and like having that access into, and I mean, in some ways I think it's a luxury. In some ways I think it's a necessity, but this fine tuning and this awareness of like, as you're calling it, input output, it's massive. It's really massive. And our
Yeah,
health depends.
it's an interesting one. Like I love animals, and I'm pretty sure about half of the people I know at least also love animals, maybe probably even a far higher percentage. And it's easier to watch animals and say, well, like, look at this cat. This cat may have very fast reflex muscles and very sensitive, and it's just easy to observe that. I think humans can be harder to observe at times because of those emotional blockers that prevent you from objectively studying, not entirely objectively, like it's obviously subjective, but from trying to be like gaining a sense of accuracy in understanding the self. And I think that's where, if you think about every personality is a reflection of the social consciousness in which they exist, especially those closest to them. And one's identity is one's understanding of their role in this greater social consciousness of this lineage of humanity. Like, go to a park, or whether you see a car, well, it took a lot of generations in order for that product to exist. And whether you have an opinion on, say, it's a Mazda or a BMW or whatever it is, there's a lot of social conditioning and in generational context that leads the mind to such a conclusion and such an identity. And I think that's where just broader self-awareness of the self helps one understand, like, what does it mean to be me? And I think that is a very important question in order to then figure out one's own happiness.
Yeah, I'm curious if you would be open to sharing a tiny bit about, because I think a lot of what you're kind of touching on is this concept of the relationship to ourself, the relationship to food, the relationship to our emotions, the relationship to our social contract concepts. Would you be open to sharing like how that shifted for you during our working together?
I think the most useful model that I found was the one where you basically said, as a if you were to approximate it, average human minds operating at something like 60,000, 80,000 to thought feeling combinations per day. And like, you think about a computer in bits and bytes, or a quantum computer in qubits, and then you think about consciousness and like our own like myceliated webs, and just like, what does it mean to exist? Like, it just goes back to consciousness. And that's where like Chandra and I spent a lot of time saying, in a very, like, there's obviously the theoretical, but then there's the applied, which is, what circumstances on a regular basis are you seeing that are either making you happy or sad, or creating hope or fear, or whatever dichotomy you'd like to study. And then, based on that circumstance, what are the thought and feeling relationships that are then causing an action, where that action is either you coping with that circumstance, or finding a way to empower yourself to end up with a more positive result. So circumstance through creates thoughts and feelings, creating action, creating a result. And the point's not to be perfectionistic in, is this the perfect model? Rather, it's to use a simple algorithm of, I'm consciously and unconsciously having a bunch of reactions emotionally, with some themes where like maybe there's a 75, I think you said there's like a 75% correlation for the average. Again, these are all approximate, but it just helps anchor. I thought that exercise was just very anchoring in trying to figure out uh, who am I on a day-to-day basis? How do I fit? And when I feel things like anxiety, fear of the future, or depression, disappointment with the past, and I feel connections, not entirely where I'm not entirely depressed, anxious person, but for sure there were areas of my life where I felt that I was coping rather than productively solving and resolving, that then helped me end up, yeah, you end up in like a happier uh, life position. And in like, again, I say that I think sometimes people will go through these exercises and try to convince all their friends to do it, but their friends might not need it. So I say this all in case it's useful to you if you're listening, not saying this is something that's like globally applicable to everyone and anyone. Some people do that. You know what I mean, Chandra? Like some people will go get help and then assume that everyone else needs the same thing. And it's like, well, everyone's different. Everyone has a unique subjective position of unique circumstance and unique
Hell yeah.
emotional reaction and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's no one size fits all for sure. Yeah. Um, so thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate that, Devin. And I love that you touched on the coaching tool that my teacher, Brooke Steele, she calls it the model. I, in my coaching program, call it the internal human algorithm of change, because I do feel like it's just such a powerful way to gain awareness, see what's happening unconsciously, and like, have the option to do things more consciously. So I loved your description of it. You always have such a great way of describing things.
You know,
Thank you.
it's Thank you, Chandra. It just it continues to amaze me. Like we have something like 8 billion people today, and people estimate there's been something like 100 billion people so far. And it's like you get some people who can do significant evil and some people who can do significant good, depending on how you define the morality. But everyone starts as a baby, and everyone's path is up to them and how they change from child to productive adult. And in finding their place. And I think that's where your exercise is a great reminder that you can become superior in your own way and in a way that's not necessarily not always a competition. Like I think competition is a part of the human condition, but in a way where you can just become very good at something and find that to be enjoyable and meaningful and a nice reflection for others around you that can be inspiring. And I think that's where working with someone like Chandra, if you don't already have that kind of awareness, can help you redefine your vision and get to a spot where you can, in a repeatable manner, perform at a certain level that makes you feel confident and secure and of high self-esteem at those specific tasks, which can make you feel more authentic in yourself in that position.
Oh yeah. Thank you for those words, Devin.
Sure.
Um, I'm curious, like if you would share, like what would be your favorite part of like either our coaching sessions or my program? What would be, if you would name like a favorite or a couple favorites if you have more than one?
Favorites, I really like in the beginning, it wasn't intuitive to psychoanalyze the self, but I started to enjoy it a lot more, just like you enjoy a sport. Like I love to play tennis, and I've noticed that the better I get at tennis, the more I don't think about things like my grip. It becomes intuitive where I'm able to just react. And I found it to be more enjoyable working with Chandra. Probably we worked together for I think 3 or 4 months, something like that. I think 10 sessions, maybe 12 sessions, something like that. But probably near closer to like 8 or 9 where it felt like the training wheels were off and it became a lot easier to say, man, like I've been, thinking about I need to like whatever. It could be like I need to increase my salary and I've thought about this a bunch and then like drawing out like is this serving me or am I indulging it? And then is it like reducing my quality of sleep or my diet or my ability to take care of myself or engage in social interactions? And it just became a lot more enjoyable to feel that sense of control in consciousness, where I would feel that I could take a repetitive thought, deconstruct it very quickly, and by doing that, not feel anxious anymore. I'd be like, okay, that's fine. And I'm also very into my goals, so I would basically like analyze that, go to my goal sheet, which I look at weekly, and just say, okay, well, how do I operate in a way that serves me better rather than indulges me? So I'd say that was probably the most enjoyable part, which it was like doing push-ups in the beginning, where it's like you're not always comfortable in going through these processes, or at times skeptical, where you're like, I don't know, is Chandra's process going to work or not? But I definitely felt after, some sessions, that it was very helpful I started to build that skill set, which was one of the most valuable parts I found in the program.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. And it's something that's, I think, often kind of hard to wrap our brains around. Like, okay, well, I'm working on this one specific issue. And then what I see happen over and over, and I think what you're naming is like, okay, well, then I'm learning this tool set, but then I can also apply it to these other areas of my life. And for me, that's also one of the funnest places of like, okay, I've got the training wheels off and I've got this piece now. What other areas of my life can I apply this to and start to play with? And that's one of my favorite parts also.
Yeah, it's kind of orthogonal like that. It becomes like, just to go like at a very high altitude, it's just input output. Here are the inputs, what's the output? And then you kind of look at the efficiency and the throughput and that.
Yeah. What would be a couple other benefits of working with me? What other areas of your life did it ripple into?
Well, it goes back to like just the dualism between the body and mind. And it's like you can't neglect one and expect the other to function. And I think there's that. And I also like, there's the element of who doesn't want to talk about themselves to someone that's willing to listen. So that's also nice. I think like one of the challenges with being a founder can be the pressure to manufacture stability. And I continue to think about, how much disclosure do you give to people? Or is that distracting to, back to like Chandra's model that we were just going through? Are you creating unnecessary distractions and noise and anxieties for your employees if they're not trained to understand this? And it's like every business has its own stability issues, every business department, and it's like healthy culture hits the goals, unhealthy culture misses the goals. Uh, and CEO and the board work together to set the goals, but it's like just being able to be vulnerable and figure out areas to improve. Because I think identity can shift depending on what you have in front of you. Like, I definitely placed a lot of identity when I first met Chandra in my ability to execute in my job. And yeah, if we had like a bad month, I would feel down. If we had a good month, I'd feel up. And so there was kind of like a dopamine correlation to my happiness based on my work product. And it was helpful to just spend some time like decoupling that, and then also thinking about like, what's the role of family and relationship. And I've always been a big believer in that fiction can under help with understanding role play and social positioning, and solving through different moral dilemmas, and who's the hero, who's the antagonist, where's the line gray. And I think that just all of these things, and creating better depth and better levels of empathy in like a socially integral nature, can help one to feel more control. And a lot of it comes down to control, because if you don't have control, you have chaos. That's the opposite. And it's like a lot of what we do: regulation, security, building, surplus. A lot of what humanity's focused on is control, in order to avoid people, even things like war. It could be one society trying to find control over the other for the purposes of stability and prosperity, and or what have you. Or maybe in more negative, you see more negative outcomes as well. But I think a lot of it is, how can I as a person feel a better sense of trust and belief and confidence and self-esteem, which are all byproducts of being in control,
Yeah, and the internal relationship we have.
the internal relationship we have.
Yeah, beautifully said. Really beautifully said. The next question I have for you, can I ask you another? We're getting down to the end of my questions, but
Sure.
another
See it.
question. So the other question is, and the way it's phrased, but I want to edit it, is if you would you recommend my coaching, and if so, why? And I know you have actually recommended my coaching a couple times, and actually those coachings didn't work out. So the way I'd like to kind of edit the question is knowing that you do recommend my coaching, who specifically do you think would like my coaching be the best for? And like, would you speak to those people that, you know, maybe are similar to you or similar? We were chatting about this before we started pushing record of like, having, yeah,
Yeah.
who does this work really ideally fit for? Because it's not for everyone. So who would you talk to and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say that like I tend to be very achievement oriented, very individualistic in a lot of ways. And in that, like, I'm a big believer in either you set your goals or other people set them, but either way you get goals. A lot of people end up with goals based on their boss or their family. Could be, here's the plan at home, and then you go to work and the boss is like, here's the goals. And they might give you a little bit of leeway to help make decisions, but you're not gonna like all of a sudden go do someone else's job. You don't really have the power to do that. So you kind of get, for better or worse, either way you have goals. And I think that Chandra, if you were to try to put some product market fit on it, I'd say if you're someone who is likes to run their own self-discipline, is achievement oriented, likes to have their own goal set, Chandra's probably pretty intuitive in that sense, where you're kind of going, for me, I try to I try to run goals but I'll do like an annual reflection. I have like my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. I'm not like so rigid that I like have to hit that, but I just believe you can't hit what you don't, it's hard to hit what you don't define. Like, and like, there's a lot of amazing pathways in trying to be a human. And I think that, well, if you don't try to set up at least a hypothesis, like I want to go be a biologist or something, and like chip away at it, it's hard to get there. And then you kind of end up just working at some job you may or may not like. And I think that can happen to a lot of people. And by the way, I think it's never too late to start to set goals and say, well, this has been fine, but like, how in the next 5 years can I get to that spot I've always wanted to get to? We'll go do it. Start today. Today's a great day to start. And it's like that Chinese proverb. Uh, Best day to plant a tree, two best days to plant a tree was 30 years ago in a day. So I think that type of person is someone who, someone who is in that nature, who may have repressed emotions, where may have some echoing of early teachers or parents or other social circles, other very close and adjacent social circles, where may feel some sense of like, this doesn't feel authentic, feels like I'm in someone else's skin, something impostery. I I'd say um people that are probably less successful with Chandra would be someone who's at a job where they're entirely fine with the workplace making all of their own goals, and they don't really want to do a lot of introspection and think about things like their health, and they'd rather just exist in their current form, I guess. And I mean that not in a judgmental sense, just in that could be a very fine reality for some people, but they're probably not a fit for the program. I, does that answer the question? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think that's really well said. I have a one more question that just came up from what you were just sharing that I'm really curious if you'll share, like with the food and sleep and wine and coffee shifts that we made. Would you share what was the impact? Because I know you're on performance and productivity was your main goal. Would you share kind of like what your performance and productivity, how that's been affected from those changes, especially
Sure.
to the CEOs and the founders and the people out there making their own schedules and with the big goals and dreams?
Yeah, I think like the more you hit your dopamine, the more you make your thinking short term. Chandra had me do an experiment where I did no processed foods for 60 days. And I think I may have slipped up one day. I think I actually was fine for all 60 days, but maybe we'll say 59 out of 60. And like what I felt by, in that period, uh, very careful with things like screen time, and just felt like a lot more long-term vision in that. I, I'm also out in Boulder where mushrooms are illegal or legal. And I think that, you see an age of antidepressants and stuff, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but just as maybe an observation that I've been curious about, I think like a low dose, say 2 grams of, depending on the strain of mushrooms, every maybe once a month or every few months, can increase long-term thinking by putting more blood into the brain. I think the average blood in the brain is like 20%. And say you increase that to 21% or whatever the percentage. I don't know the science there, but I think you can create a nice parasympathetic response where you can relax. You're not in a state of fight or flight, and you can really process stuff. And check out Michael Pollan's method if you want a nice method that I think it's good to do it alone with the blindfold, with meditate. And I think that, to me, that's very powerful. But what I would say is, like, yeah, I mean, I cut out alcohol. I also used to, if I felt like burnout or exhausted, I'd get like some Zins or smoke a cigar. I used to have a deck in New York, and I'd have like a cigar and love the flavor. But I basically said, no more alcohol, no more nicotine, no more fast food, which I've stuck to. And I don't miss any of those things. I don't think about them. I But I mean, I'll think about them in terms of their role in society, but I don't feel the urges. And I think that's where I would just say a lot of it is in it's just in the ability to think more long term. If that does that answer the question?
Yeah, so it has positively impacted your ability to think long term. How would you share if it's affected your ability to like focus or be productive?
Yeah, for sure. I feel a lot more intelligent. Like I would say, yeah, I mean, shoot, like from from like late high school all the way until I was like 28, it was just kind of a weekend ritual to have some pints with friends, or a few times a week have some beers. I'm not saying like getting trashed necessarily, but the problem with that was like I would also like work hard and read and train for sports and do all kinds of other productive activities or play an instrument, etc. But I think that uh there 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 can just be there's a dulling effect, especially with alcohol. It hurts your sleep by I've done experiments with devices before with alcohol versus non, and it's just so apparent, and you see the data that it really kills your sleep, and then that can really affect your diet. And if you then start to try to increase your energy through different simple carbohydrates like glucose and fructose and whatnot, and you're not like, I think, what are the more complex ones, like polysaccharides or whatever, you're not like, uh when you get into that mindset, you significantly hamper your ability to make intelligent decisions.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel way smarter than I've ever felt, and I'm making much clearer decisions. And because of that, I'm doing a lot less cleanup, especially in business. Like if you're going to be an entrepreneur, Chandra, of course, works with a lot of entrepreneurs. You're essentially a high performance athlete. And if you're not sleeping enough, if you're not taking care of your diet, like not everyone, if you know the golfer John Daly, not everyone can get away with like cigarettes and in a gut on the golf course. Like there's guys like Tiger Woods who may have their own issues, but who doesn't have their own issues, but he's a good example of someone who takes care of his body and fit, at least for periods. And but yeah, I would just say like the more I take care of myself, the more fun business is, the less cleanup I have. And there's like a Pareto efficiency, if you know the 80-20 rule, where I ask myself a lot, what is really important and what's unimportant? And like one of the lists I like to keep, it's really simple, but I find it effective as I say, important, urgent, important, not urgent, not important, urgent, not important, not urgent. And I try to avoid the last two at all costs. They're just, it's an
Yeah, the
activity.
practice of bringing them into the consciousness is so powerful because so often we're just trying to do it all, and actually making those lists and looking at it with our prefrontal and making those higher level decisions, it's massive.
Well, I think sometimes people do activities for the dopamine hit of it and then point to it to say, look what I did. But there's like a sunk cost fallacy there where it's a fallacy because you didn't need to do it. You probably shouldn't have done it. It was a waste of time. And you get older and wiser and you strengthen your what is actually productive versus just activity. But it's all about like, can you just like if the more like I tell myself a lot, like the more I make clear decisions at work, then I can go read a book, I can go on a hike. I maybe if it's winter, I may get out and ski. Like I can just do more fun stuff if I take care of myself and I make less errors at work.
Hell yeah.
My revenue's higher, my expenses are lower, on and on.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for articulating all that. That was really beautiful. Two things. One is I wanted to share a story that maybe you don't remember, but I remember you had gone to Easter, I think it was with your family, and I think it was like just after you had finished the food reset and you
Mhm.
ate some sugar and you were like, "Oh my gosh, I have no desire to ever eat sugar again." I like ate some sugar and I couldn't focus on reading my book. And I remember just this like, and oftentimes like clients come with that just like a click and that aha of like, "Oh, I see the effect." And like for
Mhm.
you, focus was like one of the most important things. And you're like, if this is affecting my focus, I am not interested. Like, do you remember that story or that moment, that weekend?
Sure. I think people underestimate how long it can take to heal or the impact of their actions. Like, I used to do yoga at 4 p.m. every Sunday back when I played tennis. And I remember thinking, how do people just simply not do yoga? And then, like, years went by and I started to not do yoga and had back pain. And I was like, well, I guess this is what happens to some of these people. And I mean, wow, I was just the stiffness of not doing yoga anymore. And now I'm back to it and fine. But I think yeah, food was the same way where you, or even like with alcohol, I would say probably whatever, how much I was drinking, regular drinker. Man, it probably took 8 months to really feel like just
Fair.
it was, like, not like a heavy fog, but it was like I remember 8 months after I stopped drinking, it was like this, "Holy shit, I've never felt this intelligent and this good." And it took 8 months. It didn't happen after, like, 2 weeks. Like, I stopped craving alcohol after, like, 2 weeks. Like, you hear about people do that every year, like, was it Sober October? And then they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to have that beer again." I was probably in that crowd. Like, I wasn't like scratching my arms like, I need a beer right now," but I was like I was very much like a, "Man, a beer would be nice," or, "Oh, that was a stressful meeting, I could use a beer." I was like that kinda it was like the conditioned response to stress. And it took a while to, like, train that out to where the conditioned response was not to get a beer or not to even think about a beer. But, uh, it's just it's interest it goes back to there's that guy Brian Johnson that I find hilarious from Blueprint, who started Braintree, where his new startup, he's, like, testing himself, and a lot of it's sensationalism, and he's taking, like, blood from his kid or whatever he's doing. He's trying to play around with, like, how do I reduce my, the speed of my aging, whether it's at, like, the telomerase chain level or whatever, and he's like, "The basic exercise of sleep enough, eat the right things, and exercise is surprisingly hard for the average person to do regularly for multiple years in a row." And
Yeah.
it's so true. Like it is. I find it hard. I have to pay like I have a really good set of habits now, but I know that like if I started to like drink again or eat processed food, it's easy to then just get used to that. And then all of a sudden you shave 10 years off your life. You end up with 20 years of chronic long-term conditions. It's just it's very easy to end up in a situation that can create a less optimal life experience.
Yeah, and to embed it into our lifestyle, it is a feat, and I think we would both definitely agree, well worth it.
Well worth
Um,
it. I've never been
I want
happier and healthier, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're really welcome. I want to touch on one more piece that I just love that you brought up about, and especially because you're living in Colorado where psilocybin is legal. And I
Mhm.
actually have a really dear friend here. I'm living in Nevada right now, and they're really pushing for legislature on decriminalizing, plant medicines and, the use of these tools for healing. And yeah, I don't know if you know this, but I actually just recently have started offering integration support in a combination with my food and mood program, because
Oh,
in
cool.
my experience, plant medicine is just the exponential changer. It like
Mhm.
takes what we're learning intellectually and really kind of brings it into our body. And so, yeah, I'm a massive fan and think it's just one of the most powerful tools. So I love that you brought that into this talk. Thank you for that. My
Well,
last question is there anything else you have to add? That's the last question.
well, to your psilocybin point, I would argue that a regular meditation practice is not the same, but also very effective. I just think that psilocybin is unique in that it reduces the amount of ego that you feel. And you hear about things like ego death, where if you were to say, like, compare it to like beer, where, oh, I'm very lightly buzzed to I am drunk. You could say, well, my ego is like at its normal level in a sober manner. And ego drives survival. It drives like acquisition of food, shelter, finding a mate, like all of these things, finding meaning, like whatever, specialized meaning in a social in civilization. And if you can reduce that from your individual subjective level, you can think about yourself where it's not about you. It's simply about the fact that you are a living and breathing organism. And what is so powerful about that is it makes you look at yourself as if you're an animal that you need to take care of, at least for me. So, like, I have a cat, and I think about the cat where I'm like, if I start to feed the cat a bunch of sugar and a bunch of treats, well, all of a sudden the cat might die a few years sooner, or might have a dopamine dependence where it might develop behavioral issues because it's then like classically conditioned to act a certain way based on that. So I'm like, I always, I take very good care of my cat, and I'm very careful in what I feed the cat, and I've used GPT and whatnot to figure out like how can I optimize the cat's lifespan and what kinds of just different things like that. And like I think what uh, psilocybin.
Processed.
What?
Don't give your cat processed foods.
Yeah, exactly. No processed foods for the cat. But like, it's crazy that like we can think so deeply about our pets in such a context, but sometimes forget that we too need to, like, as an example with sleep, like very, very small percentage of the population doesn't sleep like whatever 8 hours. And if you think about metabolism, mitochondrion, and the proton motive force and the organic chemistry of being, like, not if you start to go that route and you realize like the brain waves and whatnot resetting these energy pathways, stuff that like we're still trying to understand fully, uh it's just it's I think it's useful to be able to take yourself outside of yourself, whether through meditation or the occasional psilocybin dose, and get to a spot where you can feel a lot more contentment, less envy, less need to chase status or live in different vertical hierarchies, and hit dopamine amounts and entertain yourself and pleasure yourself, etc. And I think that one of the paradoxes of being human is if you can fight envy and find contentment, you can find happiness. And that's where I all the above, like including psilocybin, are tools, and working with Chandra is a tool. But I think a lot of it comes down to, can you be content and not over consume or skip on things like sleep, etc. So I'll end with that. I could keep going, but I'll end.
I know we can definitely.
I talk a lot, so
I
I
know,
was
I know.
trying to
I love
mute
it. I would say one of the ways to tag on to what you were saying is I see psilocybin in many plant medicines, and I would even excluding alcohol and weed, I would say is questionable, but plant medicines as a tool to actually feel more of what we're feeling and to process, because I think the natural reaction to kind of pushing away our feelings and not feeling emotional pain really gets in our way. And that's one of the biggest tools that I see with plant medicine. It kind of softens that resistance or that avoidance and
Mhm.
allows us to be in relationship with ourselves in a really useful way. So yeah. Am I going to get the
Yeah.
last word? I want to have one last word.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, there's the philosopher Alfred Adler or social psychologist Adler, who was like a product of Jung and Freud, who basically said that humans, in order to be like, he basically said humans go through. There's a bunch of stuff I like send him, but I'll just say one section. He says that there's the inferior part. Like, I may be an inferior chef today. I may have an inferiority complex and say, well, my taste buds and my nose isn't very good and my hand speed's not good. I'm never going to be a great chef. So then I've immediately created an excuse for my lack of performance. But that's also a defense mechanism. The fact that I even had that engagement could have been, oh, I wish I could cook well. I would love to just wake up and be able to cook well, but I've created an excuse for the lack of performance to reinforce the fact that I'm inferior. The next level in a statement is you can end up with a superiority complex. You might say, well, like my family, everyone's a good cook, but you yourself aren't, but you might like try to sell this identity like, well, we are all good cooks. But like, well, when's the last time you made a good dish? You haven't. You don't actually know how to be a good cook, but you might have this complex that suggests that you think you're good at it. And and then the last one is superior. It means that you've actually put the practice in, and you see it in the work environment where someone's a B player today. Doesn't mean they can't be an A player. It just means that they're a B player today. Where if you give them a task, which is why giving task on during interview process is so effective, you want to see if they can actually do the thing they say they can do, that they aren't selling a superiority complex because they may want like a higher salary or a title, or that they work for your company or whatever their motivation is. I say that because a lot of this type of work is getting in touch with your ego and helping your ego understand, how can I be superior in ways that I want to be superior? Because having a superiority complex or an inferiority complex or being inferior are all distractions. You want to be superior. Your duty is to become superior. So I'll end with that.
Oh yeah. So if you want to check your ego and become superior and yeah, invest in the foundational concepts. Fuck yeah. Thank you, Devin. Thank you,
But
thank you,
yeah,
thank you.
thank
I'm
you.
gonna I'm gonna hit stop recording. Thank you.
Sure.